Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Writing Life. I'm Stephen W. Long. And I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. This is the people who see this broadcast locally will know this is a small town. And when we started the program, I thought, how quickly are we going to run out of guests? And we haven't yet. So somehow, miraculously, writers either come to us or we learn about these folks. And my guest today came into the store where I work, the Habitat for Humanity Restore, and just so pleased to invite Charlie Price today. And we're going to get into some stuff. Charlie has some real experience that I hope he shares with us. So Charlie, good welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Good to be
Welcome.
here.
So I'm going to set you up a little bit with the first question. I know you've done teaching, and was it writing teaching, or?
Not formally. I've done that
Okay.
at writers' forums and at
Okay.
conferences.
Okay. So here's my setup question. If you had one piece of advice to give to an aspiring writer, could you name that? What would that be?
One piece. You know, so many things come to mind. I guess that's always the case, that it's hard to choose the first one. But I think the first is that we don't so much make up our characters as see them. We find them.
Wonderful. Yeah.
We know them as composites throughout our life.
Okay. That's terrific advice, which is a different answer than I anticipated, but it's perfect. The reason I asked that, are you familiar with Garth Stein? The Art of Racing in the Rain was a successful book. And he was in town one time, and I got to hear his talk. And after the talk, a young lady came up out of the audience and asked that question. Garth is, I don't know what, 40-ish, and she was probably late teens, early 20s. And she said, what can I do to be that kind of a writer? And he said, well, the first thing you need to do is a stowaway on a tramp steamer. And then he had a series of things that were improbable, but what he meant was, you need to have something to write about. You need some experience. Mm-hmm. I've read your biography, or your bio. You have some experience. You've traveled, you've taught, you've done a variety of things. Can you just let people know a little bit about your background?
I've been lucky in that I've had a chance to live in Italy and New York City and Mexico. And years ago, I read a book called What Color's Your Parachute, where you plan a career.
You bet.
And what I know now is that I don't think it's possible to plan a career because things happen. Our life, we follow our life where it leads us. And,
wonderful. Yeah.
I've had a chance to do executive coaching with S&P 500 companies. I've had a chance to go to writers' conferences. I've had a chance to teach high school dropouts in Bedford-Stuyvesant in New York City in a converted barbecue pit. And all of these elements really enriched my life. My goal, I would have said my goal is to be of use to other people. But I don't know if that ever happened.
Oh, I would think it did.
But I know that it enriched me hugely.
Yeah.
I worked for years on a locked psych unit. And again, I thought, well, maybe there's something I can offer. But I got so much inspiration and courage from the people living with those conditions that I thought I might not have the courage to do.
Wow.
But they did, and so I could borrow their courage. In fact, the stories that I've written all come from experiences, things that I learned in schools at risk or in psych hospitals that stuck in my craw.
Right.
That.
But again, you've got something to write about.
Yes.
Even when you change that, and as you said, characters are a composite, maybe situations are a composite.
Well, especially in my line of work as it was, that they have to be unrecognizable.
Right.
And for the book you're holding, I had to wait until the people involved were deceased.
Okay. Well, I want to talk.
And still
about this.
changed it a lot.
Yeah, sure. Caroline, let's see, where am I? There we go. I wanted to show this. I felt so lucky to get your book, just enjoying the heck out of it.
Good.
And now this won the Edgar Award.
Yes.
So I want to talk about the book, but at first I want to talk about the award. Am I right that this is a YA novel? Is that part of the criteria?
Yes.
Okay.
It's there are several categories, and this won the YA category.
Okay.
Actually, I think of them as crossover books because I really hear a lot more from adults than I do from young people.
Okay, well that's a good segue.
Young people often don't take the time to respond or get in touch.
But I bet they read it.
My thought is.
Yeah, and the reason that I bring that up is that wouldn't be an area that I would naturally gravitate toward. In other words, YA, or at least I don't think I would. This is terrific, and it's so engaging. And what I love a lot of things about it, but I love that your protagonist is high school age, but he's not a knucklehead. You know, well, I mean, his vocabulary. I don't think you play down to maybe that demographic. You know, you don't. He doesn't talk like that, and he says intelligent things, and he's observant. So, and I think to some extent we want to feel like we would do that too. You know, if we were in that situation. So that's one thing, and I don't want to give away too much, but I love how it's the interrogation, and you use that as a vehicle for him to tell his story. So, where did that come from?
First, I want to respond to something you said just a second
Sure.
ago. I never think about writing for kids.
Okay.
Never in all these books. I write for my friends and the people I love and respect, and
Sure.
and myself. And but I did choose YA for a reason. I thought that I knew as a therapist and teacher there were things that kids were always reluctant to talk to me about. And if we could talk about a character in a book, it got much safer quickly.
Okay.
So my hope was if parents or teachers and kids read these books, they could talk about difficult issues like domestic violence or abuse or relationships with police, all those issues that are controversial and also difficult to discuss when you might be talking about yourself or your friends, and that would lead to more exposure. So I think that's happened in a number of cases where people have been able to read one of these stories and talk about what happened to the characters, and as a result have a dialogue with their parents and teachers that might not have been forthcoming otherwise.
Yeah, I think when you don't want to be the first one, maybe. I remember hearing about, I think it was in Oahu, people would sit on the shore and watch the big waves. I mean, they did that forever. You didn't surf that until somebody did. And so that's kind of like, it's a pioneer, and maybe this is the pioneer for them, kind of a trailblazer.
That'd be my hope.
Yeah.
What would you do if you were confronted with a situation like Gabriel ran into? Do you think he handled it well? Those are kind of open-ended questions that we can speculate about Gabriel's behavior.
Sure. You know
Not
what I like, and
necessarily
again, I'm
our
not
own.
finished, but I'm close enough to the end. I think I get this part of it. And that is, I think at that age, male-female relationships are, you know, you're kind of finding your way and everything. And he's got a couple of things going on and with different people. And the young lady that he's trying to protect could have been put in just a terribly compromising position, and he's sensitive about that. And I thought that was great.
Great. that was certainly an issue we had to deal with often in schools and in
Was
the
it really?
hospital. Yeah.
I am so sheltered. I don't know that stuff.
Joni tells me that I've kind of lost perspective, that I lived in that realm of rather extreme problems for a long time.
Sure.
Particularly with young people who could not take their issues home. If they took them home, it got worse quickly.
Uh-huh.
But let me respond to the other part of your question. Sure. I wrote that book 11 times sequentially. And it was so important to me. I worked on it over a period of years. And finally one day, I thought, well, what would it be like if I had detectives ask the questions that I would ask? Mm-hmm. And Gabriel, because I know him like a best friend, and he asks what he would actually do in response to those questions. And when I started doing that, the book fell into place for me.
Okay.
And I know it was 11 times because one of the times I talked about this book, I reviewed my computer just to see if I was forgetting anything I wanted to say. And there were the 11 different renditions, one from the problem boy's point of view, one from the father's point of view.
Really?
One from Wibb's point. Anyway, writing the story from the boy who was so socially sick was too disturbing. I didn't finish that one. But the using the tool of an interrogation was fascinating to me. I got to be the deputies and the witness and everything.
Yeah.
And I never know how a story is going to close out. I never know how it's going to finish. And I loved, once I hit that interrogation, the book moved on its own for me. So I got to see some new things.
Part of why we want to do the show, I mean, I think this is important. I think an awful lot of folks want to write or do write. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's nice to hear how somebody else does it, or that maybe it's not easy, or for me, when I found out that there's some kind of a process, you're not just born with this talent and sit down one day and just write something fabulous.
Good point.
It really is a process. Mm-hmm. So with you, I love that you say you don't know how it's going to end. That's very Stephen King. That's what he says. As opposed to John Irving, who says the first thing he writes is the last sentence of the book. And
I've read that.
Yeah. And for Irving, he said, if you didn't know the end, it would be like meeting your friends for lunch and walking up to the table and saying, something fabulous happened to me on the way here today, without knowing what that was. You can't say that if you don't know what that fabulous thing is. Stephen King is the opposite, and he said for him, writing is like archaeology. That you're walking down the path and you stumble on something and you say, well, that looks interesting. And he starts picking away at it and clearing it away. And he says, what I might find is a short story, or it might be a novel, but I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, for me, part of the fun of doing it is that discovery. Mm-hmm. If it's too formulaic, then you're just filling in the blanks, it seems like.
Well, that's what happens for me as a writer. I originally outlined a book, and I lost all interest in it the minute I'd finished the outline. Exactly. I think Irving is a marvelous writer, and I love his books. But for some of us, I think we write for the pure pleasure of the experience of writing.
You bet.
We love words. We've loved them from our childhood. Words like Popocatépetl or refractory. Anyway, words please us, and sure. Putting them together is like building a crib wall. If you can put them together really tightly and they don't scrinch, mm-hmm. You can drive a Jeep on it.
Scrinch is a good word too.
It is a good word. So the pleasure of using words as a tool, but looking over the top of the computer and following people that interest me, either because they're I don't respect their morals, and I'm not sure what they're going to do, or I admire their courage, or they're so different than I am.
Yeah.
Getting a chance to see how they're going to handle a situation that I put them in pleases me no end.
Yeah.
And in Desert, we don't have a copy of Desert Angel, but Desert Angel is a story about a girl who's fleeing from a predator. And
is this a real, I mean, like a person predator, an animal, or is this
a
an
person.
alien? Or okay.
The person who killed her mother
Okay.
in the first
This is
page.
not science fiction.
No,
Okay.
no. It's another one of those hospital stories.
Okay.
Anyway, in this particular case, I had seen this, visualized it many times. I knew what she was going to do. She was going to walk down this dirt rut. She was going to cross a road and go up in the mountains. She was going to meet an Afghan vet who was going to help her. I could hardly wait to see the Afghan vet. And when she got to the road, she turned right.
They just don't behave, do they?
And that's the truth. And
Yeah.
Joni heard me yelling from upstairs. I called writer friends. I said, I just was uncomfortable with it. It was so unexpected to me.
Uh-huh.
And in following her to the right, the entire book changed. I met a Mexican-American family I would never have met otherwise. And the story gained a huge amount of richness.
Mm-hmm.
So I trust the process. And the process is, in some ways, almost meditative. I have to relax.
Well, absolutely.
I have to let go. I have to not think.
I call it daydreaming, but yeah.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to not think and just watch. And there's a great pleasure in that. And I
Are
had a
we
chance.
weird? I mean, can anybody do this? Or?
Well, I'm afraid you might be.
Okay, well.
Yeah, but I'm normal
you're
to a
fine.
fault.
Okay, all right. We got that cleared up.
Yeah, it's a good thing we did that on the air.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got a chance, doing the hospital work, I got a chance to learn some about brain science. And one of the things that is coming out in book after book recently, the last 5 years, is that our brain loves to make up stories.
Mm-hmm.
If we will let it alone, it will make up a story in a flash. If we ask it any question, give it any challenge, what's that person doing over there by the window? We may barely be able to see that person, but we'll start to think, well, they're standing there, their hands are in their pockets, they might be waiting for a ride, or maybe a phone call, or maybe they're waiting to sell drugs. Mm-hmm. And we're off and running. And our mind continues to provide us with information. Now we're looking at how they're dressed. We're looking at the cant of their hips and their shoulders, and is their face relaxed? And the mind, if we don't think, if we just watch, our mind will fill out that picture, pixel by pixel, as richly as we want.
Boy, that's a whole, I mean, we could spend at least an hour, because now I think you're sort of, on one hand, talking about how unreliable an eyewitness is.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that.
No, I think that,
Which is true.
As you were talking, I thought, where does that come from? Is that evolutionary? Are we trying to protect ourselves? In other words, analyze that person and evaluate a threat? Mm-hmm. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, it's absolutely survival oriented.
Sure.
That's its genesis. I don't think there's any disagreement about that. But the power of the tool is pretty spectacular, because if you just keep watching, if you provide these, when you provide a challenge, the brain creates a working, like a desktop, and pours all your memories into it, and then neurons comb through it. And if you can relax and allow something new to come up, something new will come up. Mm-hmm. That's a mix of all your experience, everything you've read, what your uncle told you. And you can play with it, and you can ask, so what's she gonna do? I don't know, but I watch her. And she'll do something. Just the suggestion, it will keep rolling. And it'll roll back. we do, in at Asilomar, I did some exercises with the group, and one of them was watching two people stand up in a restaurant. You're standing outside, you're looking through the window, and two people stand up, and one takes a roll out of the center and throws it at the other. And then the challenge is to what happens next. Anyway, so in short, our brains are really happy to let us play in that field if we choose to.
Because of when we're filming this, I want to say Ursula K. Le Guin died, I think, yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And I was privileged to see her. We're part of the Terroir Creative Writing Festival, and she was our keynote speaker. And I remember one of the things she said was she would advise teachers when the kids come back from vacation for the summer, and she has them write, don't have them write what I did on my summer vacation. Have them write what I didn't do on my summer vacation. Because what you didn't do was you didn't go to Mars. You didn't ride a dinosaur. And that opens that up. Boy, you know, what we did is pretty small, but what we didn't do is a bunch.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. You know, when you were talking about that, I think this is the right terminology, directed meditation. And what you've described, again, I keep saying a dream. You know, have you ever woken up and said, where in the world did that come from? But it's, I guess we fabricate it, or we bring these experiences in and sort of mash them up, and that's part of that.
It's a great deal like that. Although with the directed visualization, there's someone giving there's a cognitive part of the process that I try to sidestep if I can.
Oh, okay.
I'm teaching myself, or I teach myself to let go of to assume that I'm always going to want to know what happens next.
Okay.
And then I'm going to want to know who that person meets, and I may need to know something about the restaurant. And one of the things about being a writer is we develop an ear. And that's a very odd concept, because it means that as we're writing, somehow we have a tickle file that says, you haven't described anything. People aren't going to be able to see where you are.
That's kind of a rhythm in your writing, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. And in order to get that rhythm, I have to read it aloud.
Yeah, it changes it.
And it really helps to read it aloud to my wife, Joni. And when I told her that I was going to need to read everything aloud to her, she, of course, ran from the house screaming. I was able to find her in the motel, even under an assumed name. But that's part of my process, is to read it aloud so I can hear it. And in that process, I have to cut things that I don't want to cut.
You have to kill your children.
Yeah.
That's the phrase?
Yes. You have to shorten lists.
Yeah.
You have to shorten dialogue. You have to, I'm forever having "and one more thing," or just one more descriptive phrase. And it ruins the impact of the sentence.
Less is more.
Yeah.
A lot of times. I wanted to say my primary writing teacher was Elizabeth George, the novelist. And she taught us what she calls a THAD, T-H-A-D, and that is a talking head avoidance device. And so you were saying that there's a rhythm. Well, if you get two characters talking back and forth, then the reader loses grounding. Where, I forgot, are we in the bedroom or back in the car? You know, that kind of thing. And I think that's sort of what you're talking about. There's that scene setting.
A scene setting, and also a sense of what have I not done recently. Where is am I creating a broad river or a narrow stream with this? Am I writing something that is rich enough so that if I start reading it, even I start reading it, I'm back in my chair enjoying it. I've lost track of chores, and I'm in the pleasure of that floating that river.
I've heard that, and this starts on the first page, that an author has a contract with the reader, and
I think that's true.
and the reader picks that up in the first page, the first little bit, and the contract is the author says, I'm going to create this dream that we're both going to engage in, and I promise you that I'm skilled enough that I won't do anything to disrupt that, to break us out of the dream. And so I think that's kind of, when I read my own work, or any of us, I hope, that you go into this place, into this world that you've created, and you just kind of want to be there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the great pleasures of reading.
That's certainly my goal.
Yeah.
And by the way, I enjoyed your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm looking at our time here. We've got a little bit of time. Do you have an elevator speech maybe for some of the other books? I'd kind of like to learn about where are they set, what are they about?
I might be able to be quick.
Okay.
This Dead Connection arose out of a girl my daughter's age being kidnapped in our town and never found. And I needed to find that girl. And I was waiting for another book to travel among publishers to see if someone would pick it up. And that story was pressing on me so hard that I wrote this book to find for myself
Sure.
the missing girl so that I could let it go. The Lizard People, I'd been working with a family where the mother was so floridly psychotic. I've never seen anyone
Was
more...
this a professional thing, or you just
Yes.
encountered her?
No, professionally,
yeah.
on the unit.
Okay.
Never met anyone who was, or run into anyone who was more floridly psychotic than she was when she came in, and it caused her family such difficulty. But primarily her son, who was left to take care of her.
Oh.
And I knew kids who had lost their bearings under that degree of stress. And so I wrote this book to better understand that situation for myself, to imagine what it would be like for that young person. Interrogation, a true story that haunted me. You've encountered it now.
Yeah.
Unbelievable story to me. And I needed to understand what that father was thinking, or how could a community... I started actually with the idea, because I lived in Montana.
I was going to ask you if this is the setting that it actually took place. It's,
no.
Okay.
No, I
But
had
you
to
know this
transfer the
area.
setting. I do.
Yeah, yeah, because it's so realistic.
Yeah, but the setting, a lot of the things that happened in there did take place. Anyway, when I first got to Montana, I had come from Colorado and before that Arkansas, and I ran into some prejudice against Native Americans where the language of the prejudice was exactly the same as the language in Arkansas, and they're prejudiced. I was astounded. Mm-hmm. So that's also part of the book, is looking at the social effects of that kind of destructive racism. And that part of that book is also looking at how one ill family can really impact a community.
Talk about a bad apple.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Desert Angel, I mentioned the girl who's running from the predator. That story Joni and I were driving in a convertible down by the Salton Sea,
Right.
and that story blossomed. I've never seen anything like it. It was delightful.
You were handed a gift in that case.
A gift.
Yeah.
And Dead Girl Moon is a story about 3 kids, all of whom I worked with in different guises, but it begins with a girl who was abused at home by her brothers, and her parents knew it and didn't do anything about it. And that I know from work that I saw 3 different effects of that on 3 different girls.
Okay.
People handle it differently, as we all do.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to explore that and see what happened with this girl when she left home and got out in the world. And the last book, Dead Investigation, is a sequel. The boy here is clairvoyant in a cemetery, driven there by a lack of acceptance. That's his sanctuary. And he finds himself talking to the headstones for company, and after a while he believes they return the conversation. But he's kind of locked in the cemetery with these friends in dead connection. And I wanted to see if he could move into a broader world, if that somehow his relationships he developed in the cemetery would carry him to a broader world.
Yeah.
So,
We're going to have to leave it there, but man, thank you so much. You're a terrific writer. I'm
thank you.
so happy that we've made this acquaintance. Come see me at the store, and maybe we can go get a cup of coffee. Would that be all right? Okay.
That'd be great. I'm really looking forward to meeting some writers in this area.
Okay.
So,
Well, we've got some great ones, really.
good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that's it. I'm sorry we're out of time. We'll just have to do this again. I'm Stephen W. Long. This is The Writing Life. You can visit me at my website, stephenwlong.com. Pick up Charlie's book. It's just books. They're terrific. And hope to see you next time. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, sir.
Oh, gosh, that was great.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know, you guys want to do one just with yourself without me doing the bongos?
No,
They got
no.
enough. They got enough.
They got enough? Probably, okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch.
Oh,
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
yeah, I could use a bite too.